Hey there, folks. Quick announcement before we get any further. Unfortunately, Perks can't join us tonight. He'll be with us next week. He's had some travel issues, but we do have our own very special co-host here with us. So, with that being said, welcome to Beyond the Lane with my wonderful, glorious, beautiful co-host, YamatoCannon. Yamato, thank you for joining us one more time. How are you doing tonight?
It is my pleasure. I'm feeling pretty good, pretty tired. It's been a long day of scrimming and some classic EU drama, but it's all good over here.
Classic EU drama, wow. Almost as good as NA drama, I've heard. Which is almost
Yeah.
as good as SEA drama if you really want to get into it. But we'll get there. We'll get there pretty soon. We're going to start actually with some trash talk discussion, which is in the drama area. Trash talk's been a topic for a while now in the league, with Riot having a pretty firm hand relative to many esports organizations, many companies who drive esports scenes. When it comes to trash talk, kind of having the commentators on a tight leash and the players not always saying a whole lot. We've seen some videos between G2 and Splice that were in the trash talking vein. What do you think about this sort of thing? Do you think it's good for the fans, good for the game, good for the players? Like, how do you feel about trash talk in general in the game?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I didn't agree on this reply video of Splice. I
Okay.
had no part in this.
So you're saying that
Well,
you did it yourself, is what you're trying to tell us.
no, 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 no.
Okay.
Well, the thing is, like I think the goal should always, like, from an entertainment standpoint, I think it's important to try to create an emotional reaction among the viewers. I think that's how you make sure that people care. You make sure that people pay attention and that they want to be involved. Even if they hate you or love you, either way, you have to create some kind of emotional reaction. And if you do, all of a sudden you have a show, right? I think that's what entertainment is. So I think trash talk is very, very good. I think, for example, the Forgiven tweets with the Reckless, the entire Wrecking Crew thing that was going on, it created a lot of hype. Sure, it died down because, of course, EU production, we had to watch the game on Tuesday. Sure, it died down a little bit, but there was some real hype going on because of this trash talk. So in my eyes, I want to see more of it. I think, there's always the thing with, riots are very strict with toxicity, etc. But I think saying that really it has nothing to do with that. I think there is an open field for trash talk. I think the people are finally, the people involved in the scene are finally seeing how much they can and cannot do. I don't think it's necessarily Riot's fault that there isn't enough trash talk on the league scene, because to be honest, it's not like they punished Forgiven or whatever, and that was, some good banter.
Can it go too far? Like we saw a Febiven tweet later deleted with, questioning, I think, Forgiven's ability to pick up the ladies. Is that all in the bounds of fair play, or do you think the players can sometimes, if they get down this track, get a little too riled up, as it were?
I guess Bevan would know. No, but well, there is a difference between good trash talk and just personal attacks, right? And maybe that's where the line has to be drawn. I think if you start attacking someone's appearance or something that they cannot change, then I think you're doing something very horrible and just evil-spirited. I think if you say that you're shit at the game, I'm going to beat you, that's some good banter, that's some good trash talk. I think attacking someone's appearance or whatever is just mean, and it's pathetic in my eyes. I think saying, dude, you suck at the game, I'm going to beat you, I'm going to make sure you will uninstall this game, that's good trash talk. I don't think you should ever attack someone's appearance or anything that they cannot change, etc.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that trash talk is fun for the game. Even when it's personal, maybe sometimes, occasionally, it can be fun for the game. But you don't want to put someone down that hard. At least
Mm.
I wouldn't, and you wouldn't. If others would, that's there for them to decide. Moving on now to the whole Mark Merrill issue, which, funnily enough, again, was only an issue because he decided to speak up on it, and it's become a big thing. He's now had a statement come out that said that Riot's planning to have, let's see, revenue sharing with team-specific items in-game. They're going to have more jerseys in stores at live events. And they're looking at, in the future, having things like revenue share with media rights, franchising, all that good stuff. So he's saying a lot of the right things. I guess a two-part question here. the first thing is the first part. Do you like what he's saying? Do you like these ideas? Does it sound good to you?
Well, like I like the sound of it, but the sound of it doesn't have to mean anything.
Right.
Like, I hope nobody forgets this. The community tends to be, oh, he said this will happen, and then it disappears. It's very important that we keep being vocal about this, we keep making it a discussion. But I think all the owners in the LCS are going to make sure that all of these promised things happen. Of course, in my eyes, looking at the size of the LCS and comparing it to other sports and comparing the salaries within the LCS to these other sports, then it makes me kind of sad. I could be earning a lot more money, and who doesn't like money? I do. And in this case, if all these major steps that Mark Merrill is talking about will happen, then I'm going to see some great moolah, and I would be very, very happy.
How do you feel about the fact that this all comes about from his misstepping in PR? Like, is it strange to you that this? Do you think Riot was planning to say? Do you think Mark Merrill was planning to say these same things had he not taken a big misstep and put his foot in his mouth and had everyone in the community, come after him, or is it just a reaction to that happening, which doesn't really seem ideal if it's just a reaction?
I feel like this entire issue was definitely like a boiling pot. I don't think it was just something that happened. I don't think it was just like a fire in the kitchen all of a sudden. There was something that was boiling there, and all of a sudden it started bubbling because of what Mark Merrill said. Maybe, having such a high up position in Riot, maybe he's a genius. Maybe he wanted to stir this reaction and kind of force his own agenda into the LCS, which was all these nice things like franchising, etc. Maybe he's just a genius. Maybe he's Batman, the hero we need, but we don't deserve. Is that how the quote is?
That's pretty good.
I'm not
I'll
sure.
leave it to you. I'll leave it to you. Yeah.
I'm not sure how the quote is, but something like that. He's Batman pretty much. But, looking at it from a serious perspective, sure, it's kind of sad that this is the way it was handled, Tweet longer and some Reddit comments, But I think eventually it would happen regardless, I think the Reginald video started enough conversation about it for it to surface anyway. I think if it wasn't for this comment, I think it would have been handled in a way more professional manner, but it's also good that the community have their eyes on this too. And having this conversation on Twitlonger is a way to make sure that the community have their eyes on it too.
Yeah, it is silly, but in the same, at the same time, I should say, at least it's more visible now to everyone. We have more public knowledge and more awareness overall of what's going on, and more pressure than from the public to actually make these things happen. Whereas if it was just a backroom conversation, perhaps it'd be easier for Riot to just kind of forget about it for a while, or make it a very slow process if it happens at all. So
yeah, for sure. Like they make all the rules, they make all the decisions. If anything happens behind closed doors, we will never know. And that's like the biggest issue with all these competitive rulings that have happened. We just don't know what happened. And I think in this case, if the people create a reaction and people start to get mad, then they have to do things. They have to enforce change.
are there any specific items you'd like to see that aren't listed here that you'd like to see happen for teams and organizations and players and coaches to better profit from the venture that Riot is undertaking here in the LCS?
Well, I'm not some super production businessman, but it seems pretty simple if I just compare it to any other sports. There just has to be more money involved. And media rights have to be, sold around. Maybe the esports section needs to be separate from Riot and throw some more sponsors in there. There's a lot of things that can be done in this specific direction, just monetization in general. And I think looking at the other major sports, it is there. There are clear-cut examples of what makes money, and we just need to take those ideas and apply them to LCS because it should be rather simple. It's also important not to take away from the fact that Riot, even though maybe they didn't handle the situation the best way they could, I think we should still appreciate what they have accomplished with the LCS in general, how big it is, and the fact that it's the first stepping stone, in esports in general of creating something so massive. So I think we should give them props for that. I think Riot is not necessarily some super evil superpower that just want to do bad. I think they're just running their business. And in the end now, if people are going to speak up against it, I think we will head towards better times.
What do you think about the whole LCS Forever movement and what that entails?
I think it was a Q hashtag. I'm not necessarily like aware of what it exactly means because I didn't get to see the draft that Reginald sent out to Riot with all the North American owners. They also signed it, whatever happened. I think, I saw LCS Forever for like a day or two and then it just disappeared.
Right.
So I'm not too hyped about it. I don't think it created that kind of a movement, or it didn't get that much traction or momentum that potentially people would have hoped.
Well, talking about Riot and the LCS and all this money stuff, there are rumors, there's information out there that Tencent could perhaps have an even bigger role in Riot's running of the LCS, perhaps because Riot does not run it that well in someone's eyes. For you, what would it mean if Tencent were to step in and take over the LCS organization, organizing the LCS? What does that mean for you initially?
Well, like I don't know much about Tencent. I just know that they're some big dog with a bunch of money.
Right.
And looking at the league they already run, the LPO, it is from a production standpoint, it looks great. The players are getting paid a shit ton, but I don't think it has to do with Riot. It just has to do with all the rich owners just spending all their money and cash on Korean Worlds winners. But besides that, it's hard to say. I think Tencent, looking at it and what they've actually shown in League, from that perspective, they have a nice production over an LPO. I cannot say for sure if it's better or worse, but if they see what everyone else sees, that Riot has failed to monetize LCS, then, if the issue is so obvious in their eyes, maybe they have a solution. If they think it's a problem that they have failed to monetize it, then it should be positive.
Do you think Riot's doing enough to monetize the LCS?
Right now, no way. Not even close. I think it's very obvious that LCS is just a way to advertise skins and the game. They don't want to clutter the game with other advertisements or other things to help out the teams. They just want to pocket as much money as possible throughout LCS. It's basically their own advertisement platform. So from that standpoint, they are probably cashing in a lot on all the skins that they're selling, but I think the people involved need to get a piece of that pie as well.
Why do you think Riot would be so hesitant to better cash in? Because obviously they know how to run a business and make a lot of money. So what's the hesitance there for them to better make money for the LCS and to have the teams making more money, to have the players making more money? What is the hesitance for them? Why not do what seems like a easy thing to do, at least in theory?
I think, if I'm making some assumptions here, I think if they keep running the same model that they do now, eventually owners and players are going to just have enough, the amount of hours that you need to put in and the amount of money that teams have to put in to make the LCS, make a successful LCS team is just not worth it in the end. So many owners have talked about how in most cases, maybe only the top teams gain something out of their LCS teams in terms of monetization. And I think eventually, if this continues to be the same way, I think people are just going to stop funneling the money that they are right now. I think they are going to stop funneling the time, and eventually the entire model will die out because the only person or the only team, like the only part of it that is actually gaining anything out of it is Riot. So in this case, if the change that Mark Merrill presented, and everyone wants happens, then the players and the coaches and the teams and everyone will gain more and Riot will probably gain less. But I think the sustainability of having something so massive will last like for decades. I think if teams and players, etc., have an incentive to continue on to play and to be a part of the League of Legends esports scene, then I think it will flourish and become bigger and bigger itself. And I think eventually, if we take a step in this direction, we could eventually see League as one of the classic traditional sports if it works as I imagine and hope it will be.
It sounds good. It would seem like it's in the best interest of Riot to make that a reality, so it does continue to confuse and confound why they drag their feet a bit on all of this stuff, but I guess they have too much on their plate with chroma skins to worry so much about, long-term health of the game and the franchises and the players and the coaches and, everyone who works in it.
It's just that, a lot of rioters have, it feels, the vibe I get from a lot of rioters, Riot, a lot of good people. I've never met anyone like a bad person from Riot. It's hard to find someone that is bad in Riot, really. And with that in mind, talking with some of the rioters, with the game designers, etc., they always kind of make it obvious that their vision is to make sure that, our grandkids are playing League of Legends. They want to make sure League of Legends is something that exists for a long time, and they want to keep updating it, keeping it fresh, and make sure that League is a part of, every culture in a way for a lot of years to come. And I think definitely this is a big step towards that direction, because it seems like Riot's philosophy is to make sure that League is something that stays around for forever.
Sounds good to me. We'll see how Riot follows up on all this stuff, all the LCS Forever things, all the Mark Merrill promises. We'll see how this goes into action over the course of the next several months, heading into the 2017 splits, plural, after we get through Worlds. More immediately, we've seen some comments from a fellow coach of, not a fellow coach of yours, but a fellow coach of your coaching fraternity over at TSM. Well then, I'm sure you saw his comments talking about how he would not put his players through as rigorous a regimen next year if things remained as they are, because they don't earn enough to justify what they have to go through in the LCS grind, especially for a top team like TSM, arguably one of the world's best teams. We'll see how that shakes out at World Championships. We'll see. But certainly an argument for that. How do you feel about a coach of a world-class team saying that his players can't practice the same way next split because they aren't paid well enough, compensated well enough for that?
Well, 12 hours a day, specific practice. If they have 12 hours of planned out practice, then it's definitely very gruesome, and it's something that is tough to get through. It's very impressive that if what Weldon says is true, that they went through 12 hours plus of decided and practice that was elaborate and planned out, then it's very, very impressive. And of course, if you get paid these sums that I'm assuming TSM are one of the top paid teams in the West. These sums are still very little for the amount of work that, these teams are putting in. And players, I mentioned it before, eventually if there's no improvement in the monetization of the league, then teams are going to just start caring less and less, and eventually the league will die out if there is no return for the owners or the players. And obviously, if for example TSM are going to do this year after year, then it's not going to be possible. It's just not going to be feasible. It's not going to be reasonable for the players or the coaches to put them through this if there is no positive gain out of it. So obviously, in this case, I think that the wording that Weldon used was Olympic training regimen, and comparing league to the other sports, the only difference is the pay. And of course, the fact that the league is digital, and that's shenanigans. But the biggest difference is not the size, it's the fact that the monetization is not there.
How does this reflect on your schedule with Splice players? Do you ever wonder, are you putting them through too much work for the pay they get? Do you think about that kind of thing? Does it enter your mind, and does it seem like something to consider in the future, as someone like Weldon brings up for a team like TSM?
It didn't really. I didn't really think of it like that. When I look at the hours and the amount of hours that they need to put in as players, it is certainly a lot, because their competition are all the other kids playing League of Legends at home, hoping to be in LCS, playing 12 to 15 hours a day, lying to their parents about doing their homework and not going to school, calling in sick. Those are the people that are the competition for these guys behind me. They need to keep practicing the same way, because otherwise they will fall behind. That is just the nature of league. If you are at home, the difference of practicing something like football, something physical, you Of course, you need to have friends to play with. You need to have a field. You need to have a ball. There's a lot of variables that are involved. And of course, the physical exhaustion is also there. You can't just go outside and practice 12 to 15 hours a day at all times. It's very, very easy to practice League of Legends. And that makes it very, very hard to be a player. Your competition are the 50 million kids playing at home, and they are going to put in 12 to 15 hours. You need to do the same. And, in this case, I have never thought of it, as if, they're putting in this much hours, they're not getting paid enough. I don't think looking at the hours is what is specific, because I'm sure there are people that work 12 to 15 hours a day in some other job, some shitty job, and they don't get paid enough as well. I don't think that should be the discussion. The fact is the size of League of Legends and the size of the LCS and the size of the entire competitive scene, that is where the value needs to come from. And simply because the size is so big and the competition is so much, the monetization should be there, and it should be very, very simple to to just put in place. And that is where the value should come from. Not because they put 12 to 15 hours a day. Sure, it's very impressive and they do it. But the fact that there are 50 million other people willing to, fight for their job, And I'm just pulling this number out of my ass. I don't know how much it is, but it's just, I know it's a lot, right?
Right. Yeah, it seems a tricky thing to figure out. It seems like once the teams get more money, the players get more money, and the coaches get more money even, perhaps, and it's just good for everyone. But, the idea of having to cut back, do you think he's just trying to pressure, because we've seen Reggie, of course, with TSM, also applying pressure to Riot. Do you think he's trying to pressure Riot further to do more for the players and for the coaches and staffs, everyone involved in the organizations? Or is it a real threat of, I just can't do this to my players next split because of my thoughts on this?
I don't think it's a threat. I just think he is being very reasonable. I think seeing that the future, if nothing changes, then I believe the same way. I think that every team will look at it this way. I think every player is going to look at it this way. I don't think anyone wants to have a super long career in League of Legends if it's going to be the same for a very long time. When looking at how big the esports scene is and how much money can be made out of the advertisements, etc., monetization, as we've talked about, then it's kind of sad and depressing. But then, then you kind of ask yourself, sure, at this point, if I knew personally that there would be no change for the 5 upcoming years, then I would probably not work with anything else. I still want to work with League. Maybe that's where Riot has us by the balls, but I think owners don't think of it that way, I think owners are in it to make money, they're in it to make a business, and eventually a part of me thinks the same way, that I want to make money as well. So of course, the money matters, and I hope the money comes.
They're making money for you, of course. They're making money for YamatoCannon, as he deserves. Look at this guy. Who can deserve it more than this person right here? I can't think of anyone, actually. We've had some drama in NA as well. You may have seen Dardoch out over to Echo Fox before the Gauntlet, replaced by Arc Second. Interesting selection there on their replacement. Not exactly a natural fit in the position on the map. Stepping back a bit here, how much pressure internally, how bad of a problem would a player have to be for you to replace them with a different position substitute right before your Gauntlet begins? Like, what would it take to crack your team to that degree?
It's like, I remember this scenario I had over in Meet Your Makers when we had a particular player that didn't want to play at all, but he was under contract and we had no other choice. And it becomes very gruesome. It is very, very painful. I don't know the specifics of the Dardoch situation, but if a player doesn't want to play on a specific team and you don't have a lot of choices, then it's just a painful process for everyone. I think, there's a fine line between a bad attitude and a player that just doesn't want to play. I think if a player doesn't want to play at all and he is set on that, it is very, very hard to change this player's mind. A bad attitude can always be handled, and it can be changed. There's ways to deal with it and ways to apply it, ways to reach compromises. It of course has to be very specific to a very specific situation, so it's hard for me to give a concrete answer. But I think if a player has reached the point where they don't want to play at all and have one foot out of the door, then they think that they are more important than the team and shouldn't be in the team anymore. So I think in this case, if it is Darduk having one foot out of the door, thinking that he is in fact more important than the team, then I think this is the better decision.
Let's now talk about a sad subject. I hate to go there. We put it off as long as we could. We did. Splice fell in a brave fight against G2 Esports, 3-1. G2, the European champions of the Summer Split 2016. Your thoughts, broadly, before we get into any specifics on the series and how it played out?
I feel like, G2, definitely the stronger team. We knew it coming into it that G2 is a very, very strong team, but I think it was a question of a few percentages. I think these few percentages, in a best-of-5 series, they won't matter too much, but, we definitely had a chance to take it home. In this case, looking back at the series, I think in a game or two, maybe we could have drafted differently, but I think our main issue was that we were very hesitant to pull the trigger. For some reason, it felt like the first time since months we over-respected G2. We assumed everything they did was magical and the correct thing to do. We didn't really punish them, and we kind of started questioning ourselves. And we forced things in ways that we shouldn't have, and we got punished for it. It's very, very simple and clear-cut. Whenever we've played against G2, in any case, it was one big mistake, bam, the game is over. In either direction. And in this case, the first game, I remember it very, very clearly. I have this replaying in my mind over and over, where we tried to force things with Shen and it didn't work out in our favor. And we also always had these advantages with our Shen top lane throughout the games, where we didn't transition that advantage into bot lane, which of course made a lot of problems for us. And eventually we forced in wrong ways and we got punished for it, which is completely normal. And then looking at the last game, we were just, to kind of, summarize our problem in this series was that we were very indecisive and, in those clutch moments, in those timings that we had to punish G2, and we either overextended or we didn't commit enough, and we got punished for it big time. I think a good example for it was also Game 4, where we took a lot of risks in draft. We took Fiora, we had Ryze, we had picks that basically scale into the game. They need some time to get rolling. And we did fine for 10 to 12 minutes, which is perfect for us because, of course, our competition was scaling. And then we decided to dive a Shen, which was fine, but we kind of went too deep and lost 4 men. And if that happens, you're going to lose against a team like G2. So, one word, indecisiveness.
I see it's a good word for it, because it's your word for it, and we take your analysis as the golden truth here. I did see some analysis from the experts and coaches on Reddit regarding the draft. You mentioned that you had some thoughts on the draft yourself, looking back at it. What specifically stands out to you in terms of thoughts on the draft and how that played out? What might you have done differently on the second time around if you had a second chance at it?
If I had a second chance, I think in the last game, I would definitely ban Shen over Kassadin. We thought that they would be looking for Kassadin, but then my thoughts also told me, we discussed the fact that Perks hasn't really showed that he wants to play Kassadin at all, and we kind of reacted we kind of snap reacted because they didn't ban Kassadin on blue side, and in reality we should have banned Shen because all the Shen counters were out, which forced us into Fiora Shen matchup, which in some cases works, but it's very, very risky, and I think taking risks like this against G2 is not the consistent way of playing. But, a lot of discussion was about how Vladimir was, ban Vladimir, Vladimir is broken. Vladimir, if he gets ahead, definitely, he's broken. But, usually there are a lot of ways to deal with Vladimir. It's a very obvious play pattern. Vladimir has a weakness early on in lane, and eventually he becomes kind of a lane bully. But, the early game matters a lot, and what Vladimir can accomplish in the early game is not that much. After first base, he's very, very strong, But you can do a lot with having mid push from level 1 to 6, and that's usually where a lot of the counter picks work out. You know, there are a lot of counter picks for Vlad as well. Usually, it's the champions that can kind of kill him, have enough mana to kill him. That is usually the issue against Vladimir. But if Vladimir gets ahead, he's a champion that is very, very hard to kill. You always need to be at that break point where you kill him. Otherwise, he becomes obnoxious and heals up and heals up. And of course, he's just going to solo win a fight. But usually, if Vladimir gets that ahead, other champions that would be that ahead as well would put you in a losing position too. So in reality, what really happens is if you're in a losing position against Vladimir, you just lose harder than you are when you are in a losing position against other champions, which of course on stage and in league matters because it's very rare that teams play a perfect game. Vladimir is definitely a strong champion, but I don't think he was the reason why we lost some of those games. Vladimir, you know, if you fall behind against Vladimir, then it looks really, really bad. But if you can deal with it really well, then, you know, you're fine. I think a good example was C9 versus TSM, the first initial match that C9 won. Cassiopeia had a lot of success against Vladimir, and all of a sudden Vladimir doesn't look as broken as before because he wasn't ahead. He's killable, right? And if he doesn't get to survive for that initial burst or gets to survive for a long time, then Vladimir looks really obnoxious and boring to play against, but that's always the case with mages like these.
That all sounds good to me. I'm not sure if the experts and coaches on Reddit will agree, but I think they have some good things to chew on at the very least. So I'm glad that you were able to help us better understand and get into the mind of the coach in the final. It's often a bit of a mystery what's going on behind the drafts and the bans and all that good stuff. So fun to hear all that stuff. Now, stepping back a bit, looking towards the gauntlet, do you feel confident going into that, knowing that you have one series to win and to get into Worlds?
I feel very confident, you know, like 6.15 has been a very tricky patch for us, but I feel like we are finally figuring it out. You know, we've played on the same patch for a long time, so it would be kind of sad if we didn't. But you know, looking at the gauntlet and our opposition, I think we look on paper as the strongest team. But I think it's a question of us delivering than anyone else taking us down. I think if we deliver on the level that we can deliver at, then I think we should be able to take it home.
I look forward to it. I think you're going to. I feel confident. The official prediction here on Beyond the Lane, Yamato, is that you're going to take it home and go to Worlds. Well, we also predicted you're going to be in the finals at Worlds against SK Telecom. So we have to follow through on this. Yeah, that's the first step towards that. Don't let us down now on the show. I know you might want to win for yourself, for your team, but really for the show, make sure you win and go to Worlds so we can continue that prediction being true, right?
All for you, Jared. All for you.
For the show, for the viewers too. You know.
For the show,
yeah. For the show, for Beyond the Lane. Good. I'm glad we agree on that. Stepping back again a little bit further here, looking at the meta of the game as we sometimes do, we've seen some changes come back recently. Gangplank, Gragas in particular, getting hit with a Nerf bat. Your thoughts on his changes, good, bad, and different?
You know, I really, really, you know, it's like in this case, it's very hard to say because I've always thought that Gragas' flashy ult was really broken. You know, a lot of engage mechanics have been heavily nerfed in the game. You know, there are not a lot of them still there. You know, there's a lot of, you know, back in the day, there was like everyone was playing sack, mob fights, etc. People just throwing things in there. There was engages from everywhere, but now there are very, very few of them, and Gragas is one of those. And I think definitely the E-Flash ult combo was definitely very, very broken. I think changing the barrel the way they did is very, very odd. You know, I think changes like these, you know, it's very, very hard to say because Gragas needed to be changed somehow because this engage was just too broken. You know, it was too easy to make clutch plays, too easy to look good, too easy to win games off of this one simple play that every Gragas player knows. So in this case, maybe it's justified. But personally, I do not like these nerfs that make champions more clunky, like a lot of these Nidalee nerfs that we've seen. I do not like them at all. Or the Graves nerfs that we saw, like where the fluidity of a champion that makes it so fun to play and like the skill cap for example, Riven is the greatest example of it. If they all of a sudden removed all these kind of extra things you can learn to do between, cancel your auto attacks, all this juicy stuff that is a lot of fun to learn mechanically when you play a specific champion. I think this is what makes a champion fun. Is very, very boring. I think making a champion easier to play in some regard is a very, very kind of a sad approach to it in my eyes. Making it more noob friendly, I don't like these kind of nerfs. In Graga's case, it could be argued that his engage was too broken, so it's justified, and I can kind of get behind that because it was pretty broken.
Looking at the Gangplank, do you think he's going to shift out of the top lane more? So we've seen a lot of variance with him since his rebuild, actually. We've seen him kind of struggle to be wrangled in by Riot appropriately. What's a good spot for him? They seem to be having trouble balancing this champion where they want him to be.
The problem is always going to be the freaking ultimate. Like, I'm going to just bust out the patch notes once again, and I need to, I've been stuck in 6.15 in my brain. I need to just refresh my mind because I've read through it, but, I've kind of neglected it in a way. So his base health was down, mana up on Scurvy, and the Cannon Barrage. Of course, from a competitive standpoint, the Cannon Barrage was what was the most broken. It was so unbelievably broken, and it's hard from a viewer's perspective to understand how broken this ultimate was, because you were always in a position against Gangplank ultimate where if the enemy bot lane bases after pushing in, and you need to kind of gamble your way to follow them. You need to always follow them. Most likely, if they push out bottom, they will rotate into top side of the first base, and then if you fail to match them, Gangplank ultimate is going to be put on those creeps, and then the enemy team is going to get the first tower. So, of course, in 6.15, the first tower means a lot because, Gangplank ultimate would kill the minion wave that you are using to push into the tower, while the enemy team have a nice juicy wave that you can't Gangplank ult, so it's very, very sad. So, in that case, how much impact the Cannon Barrage had on a competitive game is immense because, always in a competitive game and in like the league scene, like the top level of the scene, always you need to look at what limits do any specific champions have, and the limits of Cannon Barrage, they were endless. You could force 2v2 fights and win them hard. You could force 3v3s. You can force anywhere across the map, and Cannon Barrage would just be so lethal. And then GP as a champion scaled very, very well and could impact as much as some other champions would do in a TP. He could impact a situation with his Cannon Barrage as much as a champion would impact in these scenarios. So that was what made Gangplank truly very, very strong. So these nerfs, the cooldown nerf, the damage nerf is definitely a step in the right direction. I think GP might still have a place because some of the other top laners are also getting nerfs, but I have a feeling he won't be as high priority as before. The real question will be with Gangplank is his ult nerfed enough to be kind of bad, or if it isn't? The damage nerf is 180 damage. It's kind of a big deal. It's not horrible. Cannon minions will all of a sudden survive the ultimate, which is very, very good. Maybe melee minions in some cases do too. I'm not completely sure. I forgot how much minion, like melee creeps have HP at level 6 mark. I'm not too sure about that, but if the ult is still powerful enough to kill these waves and have this impact in those fights, then GP will still see play for sure.
Let's finish off with this. Some drama, even more drama, of course, in the EU. There's been a lot of that as of late, hasn't there been? This also with regards to Splice, unfortunately. We also saw some complaints from Unicorns of Love Camp about the scrims being played out. There's only so many teams to go around when it comes to scrimmages, so I'll give you a chance here if someone didn't see the Twit longer things to explain that, and then I want to ask you as a follow-up to that, what is the solution to this when you have a limited number of pro teams needing to get experience and get practice in before an important game, and there just isn't an option for that because not everyone wants to play?
Well, in this particular case, we are 4 teams heading into the gauntlet where there's a chance that we all play each other, so that is not the issue. The way we see it is, The way I see it is I need to make sure that my team has practice. Nothing else matters to me. If other teams are collateral damage, so-called, by the fact that me getting practice, then that happens. My job is to make sure my team has the best practice, my team has the best odds of going to Worlds, and my team has the tools to succeed. So anything else that happens around that, that's just how it is. I'm not going to I'm not going to do something that is illegal, but of course I need to put my team first. And in this particular case, it was a very unfortunate situation because we had 2 days booked of scrims, and we were cancelled on as well because Giants do not scrim right now. I don't want to hang them out, but I was kind of forced to because of the situation. Giants don't scrim, which leaves 3 teams that are scrimming right now. All the other teams, the wildcard teams that are already playing their tournament, Challenger are obviously not here, and the LCS teams that requalified, they're not gonna, of course, stand around and scrim. The teams that are going to Worlds are going to take a well-deserved EU vacation. That's only normal. So there's 3 teams that are scrimming. There's going to be 1 team that will not have scrims. That's just how it is. And from my perspective, my biggest fear would be to be the 1 team that won't have scrims, and I will do anything to make sure I'm not that 1 team.
That makes sense. Is it difficult to scrim in this situation, knowing it's such a small number of teams? Fnatic, you could play them. You may very well play them with your World's chances on the line in a single series. Does that make it difficult to scrim for that single series?
It's like I'm getting so much information off of Fnatic, so it doesn't really matter. But in my eyes, I feel like we revealed a lot, and 6.15 is already a patch that is figured out. I think in this case, it's very obvious which champions are the best ones and which champions are the strongest ones. I think it leaves very, very little room for some epic or like new pocket picks. I think the only thing that scrims really reveal is champion priority is pretty much the same for every team at this point because it's been figured out at 6.15. And then the only thing that it really reveals is if a player plays a specific champion or not. And of course, from my perspective, it's beneficial for us to play Fnatic because they've been under the radar for so long now because, of course, they didn't need to play any official tournaments. So from our perspective, it makes a lot of sense to see as much games from them as possible. And of course, from my perspective as well, it's UOL seems to be, on paper, like the team we're going to face in the final best of 5 of the Gauntlet. So if we put all the pieces together, it makes sense that we only scrim Fnatic throughout these weeks.
A good explanation, and you heard it here from the man himself, the man, capital T, capital M himself, YamatoCannon, head coach of Splice, coach of the Split in Summer 16. Don't forget that. I won't forget it, and he wasn't forgetting it. No one's going to forget that. And he'll go to the World Championship and play SKT in the final. It's guaranteed at Staples Center. We'll be rooting for him the whole way through. I'm prepared for that. I hope you're ready for that.
I am.
Good. You look ready. You seem ready for it. I'm glad that we're both ready for that to happen. If you like the show, folks, follow the channel here on Twitch/Daily Dot. Is it Twitch.tv/Daily Dot, actually. Miss part of it, YouTube, Daily Dot Esports. Subscribe there for all our updates every single week, I promise. Back here next week, same co-host with me, YamatoCannon. He's YamatoCannon. I'm Jared Wynn. He'll be with me is what I'm saying. You get the idea, right? I'm sure you do. Thanks for watching.